Liam sat in the small, dimly lit kitchen, his eyes fixed on the cold cup of coffee in front of him. He wasn't really drinking it. It had gone cold a long time ago. His mind was racing, thoughts spinning in all directions. Amelia, his wife, sat across from him, her hands gently resting on the curve of her pregnant belly. She smiled at him, her eyes glowing with excitement. "I can't wait for the baby to arrive," she said softly, her voice filled with love. "I've been thinking about names, and I'm sure we'll be great parents." Liam forced a smile, but deep down, he wasn't sure. The weight of responsibility was heavier than he had expected. They were barely scraping by, with bills piling up and no clear way out of the mess they were in. He had hoped that the baby would bring them closer, but instead, it just added more pressure. He didn't feel ready to be a father. The uncertainty gnawed at him. "I know, but we're not prepared for this, Amelia," Liam muttered, staring at the table. "We can't even afford the basics right now. How are we supposed to manage a baby, let alone everything else?" Amelia's face fell slightly, but she reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "Liam, we'll figure it out. We always do. We have each other, and that's all we need." But Liam didn't feel that reassurance. He had always been the type to shy away from hard decisions, the kind to push his fears aside and hope things would magically get better. But now, with a child on the way, the reality of their situation hit him harder than ever. He could feel his panic rising. "I can't do this," Liam suddenly blurted out, his voice trembling with a mixture of frustration and fear. "I don't think I'm cut out for this. For all of it. I can't be the man you need me to be." Amelia's face froze in shock, her hand pulling away from his. "What do you mean, Liam? You can't just—" "I have to go," Liam said, his voice barely a whisper. "I can't stay here. I need to figure things out on my own." The words hung in the air like an unbearable weight. Amelia's eyes widened in disbelief, but Liam couldn't look her in the eye. He stood up abruptly, grabbed his jacket, and without another word, walked out of the door. It slammed shut behind him, leaving an empty silence that felt deafening. Amelia stood frozen in place, her hand still outstretched as if she could reach out to him. She wanted to call him back, to beg him to stay, but her voice failed her. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, not wanting to show weakness. She had never imagined that Liam would leave her like this. She had thought that their love was strong enough to overcome anything, but now she was left alone, unsure of what to do next. She walked slowly over to the window, looking out at the street where Liam had disappeared into the night. The cold wind whipped through the trees outside, carrying with it a sense of finality. Her heart ached as she realized that he was gone. For good, it seemed. But even as the pain washed over her, something inside her shifted. Amelia knew she couldn't dwell on the past. She couldn't let Liam's departure destroy her, especially now with a baby on the way. She took a deep breath, pressing her hand gently to her growing belly. "I can do this," she whispered to herself. "I'll make it work for us. For you." With those words, Amelia wiped away the last of her tears and began to make plans for the future. No longer would she wait for someone else to save her. She would be strong, for her child, for herself, and maybe, just maybe, she would find happiness again. As the night grew darker and the weight of the world seemed unbearable, Amelia made a promise to herself. No matter what happened, she would not let Liam's decision define her. She would rise above it. And with that, the first step of her new journey began. Amelia's life after Liam left wasn't easy. Every day brought new challenges, and sometimes it felt like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. But she was determined to make it work. She wasn't going to let his absence break her. She had a baby to think about, and that gave her a new strength she hadn't known she had. At first, it was hard. She had to juggle everything on her own, working long hours at a local cafe, managing bills, and taking care of herself as her pregnancy grew. But Amelia didn't complain. She had always been independent, and now more than ever, she relied on that independence to push through. One day, as she was heading to the cafe for her shift, she felt an unusual tightness in her stomach. It wasn't painful, but it made her pause for a moment. She rubbed her belly, wondering if it was just the usual discomfort that came with pregnancy. But the feeling didn't go away. A few days later, Amelia found out why. She went to the doctor for a routine checkup and left in shock after hearing the news. She wasn't expecting just one child. She was carrying quadruplets. The doctor explained everything carefully. 4 little hearts were beating inside her. At first, Amelia felt overwhelmed. How was she going to manage 4 babies on her own? But then something in her clicked. She had always been strong, and now she had to be even stronger. She would make it work. She would provide for them, love them, and give them everything they needed. She spent the next few months preparing. Her small apartment wasn't big enough for 4 babies, so she started looking for a new place to live. She was lucky to find a small house on the outskirts of town, with just enough room for the 4 babies. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers, and that was enough. The day Amelia gave birth was a mix of emotions, exhaustion, excitement, and pure joy. She had to undergo a difficult delivery, but she held on, knowing that the moment would come when she could finally hold her babies in her arms. When the doctor placed each of the 4 babies, 2 girls and 2 boys, into her arms, tears welled up in her eyes. They were perfect. She spent the next several weeks adjusting to her new life. The days were long, and the nights were even longer. There was always something to do. Feeding, changing, rocking the babies to sleep. But Amelia didn't mind. She was a mother now, and she was determined to be the best one she could be. Her love for her children was endless, and she poured all of herself into caring for them. Though she had no help from Liam, Amelia didn't feel alone. She had the support of her best friend, Sarah, who came over whenever she could to lend a hand. Sarah would help with the laundry or bring meals to the house, always making sure Amelia was doing okay. And the neighbors, who had been kind to her when she first moved in, also stepped in to help. They offered advice, shared baby supplies, and even helped out with small chores when Amelia couldn't manage them on her own. Still, the days were difficult. Amelia struggled to keep up with everything. Her job at the cafe was demanding, and her energy was constantly drained by the needs of 4 small babies. But she always pushed through, telling herself that this was what she had to do. She had no choice but to keep going. As the months passed, the babies began to grow, and their personalities started to shine through. The twins, Ella and Evan, were quiet but curious. They would lie on the floor, staring at the world around them, taking everything in with wide eyes. Mia, the youngest girl, was always the most playful. She loved to giggle, and her laugh filled the house with warmth. And then there was Luke, the oldest of the 4. He had a quiet strength to him, always watching over his siblings with a protective gaze. Amelia looked at them every day with a heart full of love. No matter how hard things got, she knew that she was doing the right thing. She was building a life for her children. And with each passing day, her confidence grew. She knew that raising quadruplets wasn't going to be easy. It would take every ounce of strength, patience, and love she had. But Amelia was ready. She had already overcome so much, and now she had a new purpose, her children. And she would do whatever it took to give them a future they deserved. 5 years had passed since Liam left, and Amelia had made a life for herself and her children. It hadn't been easy, but she had done it. The journey was filled with sleepless nights, endless chores, and constant worry. But every day, she woke up and kept going. She had 4 little ones who depended on her, and she wasn't about to let them down. Her small house was filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the occasional crying. The twins, Ella and Evan, had grown into curious and bright little ones. Mia, the playful one, had a wild imagination and could often be found playing make-believe with her dolls. Luke, the oldest, had developed into a quiet, observant boy who always kept an eye on his younger siblings. Amelia loved them with all her heart. They were her world. She spent her days taking care of them, making sure they had everything they needed, and teaching them the things they needed to know. She was proud of how far they had come and how well they were growing. But there was always a part of her that longed for something more. Her financial situation, though better than it had been when she was pregnant, was still tough. She worked 2 jobs, one as a waitress at a local diner and the other as a cleaner at an office building. Both jobs took a lot out of her, but it paid the bills. Amelia had no choice but to push herself harder, day after day, just to make ends meet. She had never expected to be in this situation, but she had learned to adapt. Life hadn't turned out the way she had imagined, but she had found new strength in herself. The challenges had made her stronger, and she had no intention of giving up now. Her children had been her inspiration to keep going. They were her reason for waking up every morning. Meanwhile, Liam had moved to a new city far away from the small town where Amelia lived. He had started a new life, away from the pain of his past. But despite the new job and the new apartment, something was missing. There was a hollow feeling in his chest that he couldn't shake. He had tried to fill the emptiness with distractions, but it never worked. Every time he saw a family, parents with their children, he thought about Amelia and the family he had walked away from. He had tried to convince himself that leaving her had been the right choice, but deep down, he knew it hadn't been. He regretted it every day, but he didn't know how to fix the damage he had caused. He thought about reaching out to Amelia, but the shame and guilt held him back. How could he ever face her after what he had done? After abandoning her when she needed him the most? As the years passed, Liam's life became routine. His job, though steady, wasn't fulfilling, and he lived alone in a small apartment. There were no children, no family to come home to. He tried dating a few times, but none of the women ever measured up to what he had left behind. He had always told himself that he was better off alone, but the truth was, he missed being part of a family. He missed the life he could have had with Amelia and their children. Despite his growing regret, Liam didn't know how to go back. He was stuck in a web of his own making, too afraid to take the first step toward fixing the past. He had convinced himself that Amelia had moved on, that she didn't need him anymore, and in some ways, he was right. She had built a life for herself and her children without him, but that didn't mean he had stopped thinking about them. Liam's story was one of regret, and his loneliness weighed heavily on him. He had lost his family, and now, years later, he was starting to realize just how much he had taken them for granted. But the question remained, was it too late to change? Was it too late to fix the broken pieces of his life? Back in Amelia's world, life was moving forward. The kids were getting older, and each day brought new lessons and new adventures. Amelia, too, had changed. She wasn't the same person she was 5 years ago. She was stronger now, more resilient, and less afraid to face the world on her own. She had learned to rely on herself and had discovered that she was capable of more than she ever thought possible. But the empty space left by Liam's absence was still there, even if it wasn't as prominent. Amelia had learned to fill that void with love for her children, with her work, and with the strength that she found deep within herself. Yet there was a part of her that couldn't quite let go of the past, a part of her that still wondered what could have been. The road ahead for both Amelia and Liam was uncertain. They were on separate paths, each carrying their own burdens and regrets. But what neither of them knew was that their worlds were about to collide in a way neither of them could have predicted. And when that moment came, everything would change. It had been 5 years since Liam had last seen Amelia. He had moved on, or so he thought. He had a new job in a different city, a small apartment, and a routine that helped him forget about the past. But there were moments, late at night, when he would find himself staring at the ceiling, thinking about the family he had left behind. He missed them more than he cared to admit. One day, Liam had to travel back to his old town for a work meeting. It was a short trip, just one night away from his busy life. He didn't expect to see anyone he knew, especially not Amelia. He thought about her sometimes, but the guilt he carried from leaving her behind kept him away from reaching out. Besides, he assumed she had moved on. She was probably living a full life with the kids, he thought, and the last thing he wanted to do was disrupt that. The evening of his arrival, Liam took a walk through the town, enjoying the familiar sights, the small cafe on the corner, the park where he and Amelia used to take walks, the old bookshop where he had bought her favorite novel. The town had barely changed, but everything felt different now. It felt empty without the life he had once shared with her. It wasn't until he saw them more clearly that his heart skipped a beat. Among the children, there were 4, 2 girls and 2 boys. The first thing that struck him was how they looked. They had the same dark brown eyes, the same smile. And though they were a bit older now, they still had the same bright faces he remembered from the last time he had seen them. Liam's breath caught in his throat. Could it be? Could those be his children? He stepped closer, almost without realizing it. And as he did, one of the little girls looked up and smiled. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The world around him blurred, and the only thing he could focus on was her smile. So familiar, yet so distant. "Mom, look, someone's watching us," the little girl called out to Amelia, who was sitting on a bench nearby. Liam's heart pounded as he turned his gaze to Amelia. She was still as beautiful as he remembered, though there was a new strength in her eyes, an inner strength that he hadn't noticed before. Amelia looked up, her eyes narrowing at first, as if unsure of what she was seeing. But as soon as their eyes met, her expression changed. It wasn't anger or surprise. It was something else, something he couldn't quite read. Amelia stood up slowly, her hands instinctively moving to her belly, as if protecting her children. She walked toward him, each step measured, her face showing a mix of caution and curiosity. "What are you doing here, Liam?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Liam opened his mouth, but no words came out. He hadn't planned for this moment. He hadn't even known he would come across her like this, in such a casual, unprepared way. All he could do was stare at her, and then at the children who were now huddling behind her, their eyes wide with curiosity. I didn't expect to see you," Liam finally managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to. I saw them. And they look like..." Amelia's gaze softened for a moment, and then she turned her attention to the children. "These are your kids, Liam," she said quietly. "They'd grown up without you. They don't know you." Liam swallowed hard, his throat tightening. He wanted to reach out, to explain himself, but he wasn't sure how. He had no idea where to begin. The years had piled up, and the distance between them felt impossible to bridge. "I'm sorry," he finally said, the words coming out almost like a confession. "I'm sorry for leaving. I should have stayed. I've thought about you all every day. I regret it every day." Amelia didn't respond immediately. She simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Liam thought she might turn and walk away, just as she had all those years ago. But instead, she stood there, her hands at her sides, her eyes searching his face. "I don't know what you want from me, Liam," she said softly. "You left us. You left me. And now you expect to come back. And what? Make everything okay again." Liam felt the sting of her words, but they were true. He had no right to expect anything from her. He had no right to think he could just walk back into their lives and fix everything. "I don't expect anything," Liam replied, his voice full of regret. I want to make it right, if you'll let me." For a moment, Amelia said nothing. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I don't know if you can, but we'll see." The conversation ended there, but it was enough. Liam didn't expect forgiveness right away, but just the fact that Amelia had allowed him to speak, allowed him to see the children, meant more to him than he could put into words. The road ahead would be difficult, but Liam knew this was the first step. The past could never be erased, but maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for a future. Liam stood there, still processing what had just happened. The brief meeting with Amelia and their children felt like a dream. The weight of the years he had spent away from them weighed heavily on his heart. He had never imagined seeing them again, and certainly not like this. His children were no longer the small babies he had once known. They had grown into bright, curious individuals. And yet it felt like he was standing on the edge of something he could never fully reach. As he walked back to his hotel that evening, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken an unexpected turn. He had thought that he was over the past. He had convinced himself that moving on was the best choice, but seeing Amelia again, seeing his children, his heart told him otherwise. The next morning, Liam decided to return to the park, hoping for another chance to speak with Amelia. He didn't expect her to welcome him with open arms. After all, he had abandoned her and their children. But he had to try. He had to make things right, even if it meant facing his mistakes. When he arrived at the park, he found Amelia sitting on a bench, watching the kids play. They were running around with bright smiles on their faces, their laughter filling the air. For a moment, Liam just stood there, watching them. His heart swelled with emotion. These were his children, his flesh and blood, and yet they didn't know him. Amelia looked up as she heard his footsteps. She didn't seem surprised to see him, but there was a guarded look in her eyes. She had every right to be cautious. Liam had left her without a second thought. But now, standing before her, he was a different man. The regret he felt was overwhelming. Liam took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. "I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I was wrong to leave you. I was scared, and I didn't know what to do. But I should have stayed. I should have been there for you, and I should have been there for them." He motioned toward the kids, who were still playing, unaware of the conversation happening behind them. Amelia looked at him quietly, her arms crossed. She wasn't sure what to make of his words. She had heard apologies before, but they had never been followed by any real change. Liam's apology meant something, but she had learned not to trust words alone. "You left, Liam," Amelia said, her voice soft but firm. "You walked away from me when I needed you the most. And you weren't just abandoning me. You were abandoning them." She looked at the children again, her eyes filled with love. "They've grown up without you. They've had to learn the world without their father." Liam winced, feeling the sting of her words, but he knew they were true. He had chosen to leave, and now he was paying the price for it. "I know," he said quietly, "and I've regretted it every day. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I need to be part of their lives. I need to be their father, even if it's late. If you'll let me." Amelia took a deep breath, her gaze softening just a little. She could see the sincerity in Liam's eyes. She had spent years building a life without him, but the idea of him being part of their world again, of her children knowing their father, was something she had never fully imagined. "I'm not sure how this works," Amelia said slowly. "You can't just come back and expect everything to be okay. We've been doing just fine without you, but the kids deserve to know who you are. I won't deny them that chance, but don't expect me to trust you just like that." She snapped her fingers for emphasis. "It's going to take time, Liam, and even then, things might never be the same." Liam nodded, understanding. He had no illusions about the difficulty of what he was asking. He knew that winning Amelia's trust, and the trust of his children, would take time. But he was ready. He was willing to do whatever it took. "I understand," Liam said. "I don't expect things to be easy. I'm not asking for everything to change right away, but I'll be here. I'll show you I can be the man you need. And I'll show them that I'm their father, no matter how long it takes." Amelia studied him for a moment, her gaze searching for any sign of the man who had walked away from her so many years ago. She didn't see that man anymore. What she saw now was someone different, a man who had finally come face to face with his mistakes. "All right," Amelia said at last, her voice steady. "We'll start small. You can spend time with the kids, get to know them, and they'll get to know you. But understand this, Liam, this is your last chance. Don't waste it. Liam's heart filled with hope. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. He was willing to take whatever small steps it took to earn back the life he had thrown away. And with that, the journey to rebuild his family began. Liam had been spending more time with his children, though it wasn't always easy. The kids, Ella, Even, Mia, and Luke, were all still adjusting to the idea of having their father back in their lives. For years, they had grown up with only their mother to care for them. And now, a stranger was trying to step in as their father. He didn't expect them to trust him right away, but he was patient. Every day, he did his best to show them that he was here to stay, that he was ready to be the father they deserved. It was clear to Liam that each child had a different way of reacting to him. Ella, the oldest, was quiet and reserved. She didn't show her feelings easily, but there was something in her eyes that softened when he was around. She often stared at him from a distance, as if trying to figure him out. Even, on the other hand, was more playful. He had a mischievous grin and a tendency to run around, acting like everything was fine. Mia, the youngest girl, was full of energy. She loved to laugh, and whenever Liam came around, she was the first to run up to him and ask him to play. Luke, the second oldest, had a quiet confidence. He wasn't sure what to make of Liam, but he watched everything closely. Luke was always protective of his younger siblings, and he seemed to be keeping a careful eye on Liam. Liam took it slow, trying not to push too hard. He spent time with them in small ways. He'd read them bedtime stories, play games in the yard, or take them to the park. It wasn't much, but he knew it was the first step toward earning their trust. One afternoon, Liam was sitting on the porch, watching the children play. He noticed that Mia kept running up to him, excitedly asking questions about everything. She was the easiest to connect with, but he could tell that she still didn't fully understand who he was. She would occasionally ask, "Are you my dad now?" with a wide, innocent smile. Liam would always respond with a gentle nod. "I'm trying to be, Mia. I'm trying to be the best dad I can." Later that evening, Luke approached him. Liam had noticed that Luke had been more distant than the others, more reserved. Luke was a smart kid, and he could sense the tension in the air. He stood in front of Liam and stared at him for a moment, not saying anything. Luke hesitated, his eyes focused on the ground. "I don't know if I can trust you," he said quietly. "You weren't there. Mom always says you were gone for a reason, but it's hard to understand why." Liam's heart tightened at Luke's words. He had expected something like this. "I understand, Luke. I know I left, and I know that I hurt you and your mom. But I'm here now. I'm going to do everything I can to make it right. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I'll work hard to earn your trust. You and your siblings deserve that." Luke didn't respond immediately. He just nodded slightly and turned to join his siblings, leaving Liam to reflect on his words. It was a small step, but it was progress. As the days went by, Liam continued to spend more time with them. Ella remained quiet, but Liam noticed that she would sometimes glance over at him, as if searching for something in his eyes. She was slowly warming up, but it would take time. Evan's energy seemed endless, and he would often drag Liam into games of catch or tag, laughing as they played. Mia was always full of questions, and Liam made sure to answer every one, no matter how silly they seemed. But no matter how hard Liam tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that Amelia was still watching him, still unsure about whether he could truly be the father they all needed. He knew she was giving him a chance, but she was also cautious. She had every right to be. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Liam sat down with Amelia on the porch. They had been talking more lately, but there was still an unspoken tension between them. She had told him that she was watching, waiting to see if he would truly stick around. But there were still moments when Liam could feel her uncertainty, and he knew that her trust in him wasn't fully there yet. "I'm trying, Amelia. Liam said softly. I'm trying to show them that I'm here for them, that I won't leave again. Amelia turned to him, her expression softening just a little. I see that, Liam. But the kids, they'd been through so much. I just don't want them to get hurt again. I understand, Liam replied. I won't hurt them again. I promise. Amelia nodded, but there was a long silence between them. She wasn't sure if she could ever forgive him for what he had done, but seeing him with the kids, seeing how hard he was trying, made her think that maybe, just maybe, they could move forward. Liam knew he still had a long road ahead of him. The children were still adjusting, and Amelia's trust was not easily earned, but he was determined to keep proving himself, one small step at a time. He wasn't going to give up on them. Not now. Not ever. It had been a few weeks since Liam had started spending time with his children, and he could feel a shift happening, albeit a slow one. Every day, he showed up, giving his best effort to be there for them. He was learning the small things, what made them laugh, what they liked to do in their free time, and how they each responded to affection. But he also realized that winning their trust wasn't going to be something that happened overnight. They were still figuring out who he was, and the road to building a relationship with them was long and uncertain. Ella had begun to warm up to him, but she remained quiet. She would often sit beside him during their evening dinners, but she rarely spoke. Sometimes she would catch him looking at her, and for a brief moment, their eyes would meet, as if she was trying to read his thoughts. Liam understood. She had every right to be cautious, and he was patient. Even, on the other hand, was a little firecracker. He loved to keep Liam on his toes, always finding new ways to play and test his limits. One afternoon, while they were outside, Even handed Liam a soccer ball and challenged him to a one-on-one game. Though Liam wasn't the best soccer player, he joined in with a grin, knowing that Even was just looking for someone to have fun with. The game was fast and filled with laughter, and for a few minutes, Liam could feel the joy of just being a part of the children's lives again. Mia, the youngest, had become attached to him in a way that made his heart swell. She would run to him every time she saw him, jumping into his arms or asking him to play with her. Her energy was contagious, and her bright smile always seemed to lift his spirits. She often asked him, "Are you my daddy now?" with innocent curiosity, and every time, Liam would respond, "I'm trying to be, Mia. I'm trying to be the best dad I can." Her simple trust in him, despite everything, was something he held close. Luke, the more reserved of the group, was still a little unsure. He watched his father from a distance, as if trying to gauge his sincerity. But Liam noticed that Luke was starting to open up in his own way. One evening, when they were sitting on the porch, Luke handed him a drawing he had made. It was a simple picture of their family, Amelia, the kids, and Liam. It wasn't much, but to Liam, it was a sign that Luke was starting to accept him, even if just a little. Amelia had been watching everything unfold from the sidelines. At first, she was hesitant to give Liam too much credit, afraid that the past would repeat itself. But she couldn't ignore the changes she was seeing in him. He was more present, more patient, and more willing to do whatever it took to prove he could be a good father. Still, she kept her guard up. She wasn't sure how far Liam had truly come, or if this effort would last. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Amelia watched as Liam interacted with the children. He was helping Mia with her food, talking to Luke about his day at school, and even joking with Even, who had been making silly faces. The children were laughing, and for the first time in a long while, Amelia felt a flicker of hope. She had never imagined that this would happen, that Liam would come back into their lives and try so hard. But he was trying. He was showing up every day, and that mattered. "You've been doing well," Amelia said slowly, her voice soft. "The kids are starting to trust you. They're beginning to see you as their father, and that's something I didn't think would happen." Liam nodded, his eyes full of gratitude. "I know I have a long way to go, Amelia, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to give up on them." Amelia smiled faintly. She didn't know if she could ever fully forgive him for leaving them, but she could see that Liam was changing. He was trying, and that was more than he had ever done before. "You've made a difference, Liam," Amelia said softly. "But I need to see this through. I need to know that you're going to be here for the long haul. The kids need to know that too." Liam's heart lifted at her words. He knew that earning her trust was just as important as earning the children's. He had a long road ahead of him, but with every small moment of connection, he was getting closer. "I'll be here," Liam said, his voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere, I promise." Amelia nodded, her eyes still cautious but filled with a spark of hope. "Then let's see where this goes, one step at a time." And so, Liam continued on his journey of redemption and growth. Each day, he worked harder to prove that he was the father and man he should have been all along. It wasn't easy, but he was determined to keep moving forward. With every step, he was slowly but surely rebuilding the life he had once abandoned, a life that he now knew he would never take for granted again. As the weeks passed, Liam continued to work hard at rebuilding his relationship with Amelia and their children. Each day felt like a small victory, whether it was a smile from Ella, a playful challenge from Evan, or a drawing from Luke. But there were still tough days, moments where doubts crept in, and times when the past felt too heavy to ignore. Despite the progress, Amelia's trust in him wasn't fully restored. It was clear that her heart was still cautious, as if waiting for him to falter. And yet, something was slowly changing between them. A quiet understanding that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward. One Saturday afternoon, as the family gathered in the living room to watch a movie, Liam felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in years. The kids were sprawled across the couch, arguing about which movie to pick, while Amelia sat on the chair, a warm smile on her face as she watched them bicker. It felt like a normal family moment. A moment Liam hadn't thought he would ever experience again. When the movie finally started, the kids settled down, and Liam found himself next to Amelia. She didn't pull away from him this time. She simply sat there, her hand resting gently on the arm of the couch. It was a quiet gesture, but it meant more to Liam than words ever could. Slowly, over the past few weeks, he had started to feel like part of the family again. The children were growing more comfortable around him, and Amelia's walls, though still high, seemed to be softening bit by bit. As the credits rolled, the room went silent, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. Amelia turned to Liam, her expression serious but not unkind. "You've been here," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "You've shown up for the kids, for me. And I see that you're trying. I can't deny that. I know it hasn't been easy for any of us, but you've worked hard. I think the kids are starting to trust you again." Liam's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a full forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step. Amelia's words gave him hope. "Thank you, Amelia," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I know it's been a long road, and I know I don't deserve your trust yet, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for them. I'm here for you." Amelia nodded, her gaze softening. "I know that now. I can see it in the way you interact with them. They deserve to know their father. And I've seen you change. You're not the same person who left us." Liam smiled, feeling the weight of those words settle into his heart. He had been so afraid that his past mistakes would define him forever. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way to start over, to be the man he had always wanted to be. "Thank you for giving me this chance," Liam said, his voice sincere. "I'll keep proving that I'm here for the long haul. For them. For you." The children, who had been listening quietly from the other side of the room, suddenly jumped up, eager to join the conversation. Mia ran over to Liam, her little hands reaching for him. "Are you our daddy now?" she asked, her wide eyes full of innocence. Liam chuckled softly, kneeling down to her level. "I'm trying, Mia. I'm really trying." "I think you're trying," Luke said, his voice quiet but steady. I think you might be all right. Liam's heart swelled with emotion. He had worked hard to get to this point, and it meant the world to him that Luke, the child who had been the most distant, was finally showing signs of trust. Amelia watched the scene unfold with a mix of relief and cautious optimism. She still carried the scars of the past, but she had learned to open her heart again, even if just a little. Watching her children embrace Liam gave her hope. She could see that the man in front of her was different from the one who had walked away all those years ago. Maybe, just maybe, they could start a new chapter together. That evening, after the kids went to bed, Liam and Amelia sat together in the quiet of the living room. The house felt different now. It felt like a home. Amelia turned to Liam, her eyes searching his face. "You've come a long way, Liam," she said softly. "I don't know what the future holds for us, but I think we're ready to find out." Liam reached out and gently took her hand. "I'm ready, Amelia. I'm ready for whatever comes next." The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would still be challenges, moments of doubt, and times when the past would try to resurface. But Liam had made a promise to himself and to his family to never give up, to keep working for the future he had once abandoned. And as they sat together, hand in hand, both of them knew that the journey they had started was just the beginning. Together, they would face whatever came next, stronger than they had ever been before. A new beginning had started.